Okay, so Led by Donkeys have just done this video, and I haven't been able to keep up with and watch all of the channels that I used to do recently. Led by Donkeys is one of the channels that actually I first started following them when they started, and when I was doing my main channel that's now been suspended, I was actually following Led by Donkeys quite a lot, and sort of like, I'd featured their channel on my channel and things like that, but then I kind of like grew a little bit apart with them. We had some kind of disagreements on certain policies and so forth, but they've always been strongly against Nigel Farage, and although I weren't particularly necessarily against reform, Farage had been breaking the election law, and my main thing is that, honesty, truth, and lawfulness. My whole campaign, the whole basis of my whole campaign is basically about the law, right? Now, these MPs are going into Parliament supposedly making the law. That's the business of Parliament, is the law, making and changing laws, right? But what we come to find is that Parliament aren't following the law, and they're not complying with the law. In fact, they're the ones who are breaking it, right, and getting it wrong. And it's not the case that they're privileged and they can do what they want. They can't just do what they want. You can't have nonsense. You can't just enact nonsense, or you can't make a law that says you can walk up the street and then make a law that says you can't walk up the street, right? Because that is conflict. And there's also certain things in the Constitution which certain things have got to be preserved and protected. And then you've got the whole Human Rights Act issues as well. But one of the main things is the American law, the US law as well. The Section 230 is being enforced in England, but it's not English law, right? Now, I just made a video with a map on it. I guess I could put the link for it in this, right? And it's a bit of a long video, but it discusses globally what's actually been happening, mainly with social media, right? And it is a social media revolution. Parliament and the MPs, what they're actually doing is they're actually, at the moment, they're engaged in a social media revolution against the law, against their own laws of Parliament. They're breaking the law, and they're doing it in cahoots with the Americans and China and other countries by completely and totally ignoring the fact that different countries have different laws, right? Now, they're putting the blame on the platforms because Parliament isn't a platform, right? Parliament isn't a media website, but it's using it, right? Now, the American websites are breaking English constitutional law, right? And I reported it to MI5, and, if Sir Ken McCallum is not going to do anything about that, I can't make him do anything about it, right? Apparently he wanted to prosecute some civil servants for breaking the law to do with spying in China, and the CPS did not pursue it, right? So I guess that's an example. I don't know whether that is propaganda, whether or not they've, one of these tried to make people think this or that, maybe try to make people think that they're interested in pursuing the law, I don't know, or make people think that it's fruitless trying, because if the MI5 chief sincerely and honestly tried to get action against civil servants for spying with China, and then the CPS says that, it's not a threat, then is that not an example and embodiment of when we ourselves, or all the people who now are ringing the police up and complaining, or ringing Parliament up and complaining, and other generally other people who have also made complaints aren't getting anything done about it, or they say that there is nothing wrong? If the Crown Prosecution is saying China's not a threat, right? That's effectively like me complaining to the Electoral Commission, saying, Reform aren't breaking the law, when they are breaking the law, right? Graham Moore's having to prosecute Reform, or actually, for that Runcorn Helsby by-election, it was actually how it was, the election itself was run, right? He's having to do that himself. The police didn't act. I also reported election offences to the police for that election, and they didn't pursue it. We're actually not having the police or any of these non-departmental government agencies act. In fact, GB News got so many complaints. I think there was 70,000 or 77,000, and it took 77,000 complaints for them to act. But yet, in old-fashioned law, one person with one complaint can go get a warrant, pay for it, and then civilly arrest them and prosecute, and all done from one complaint on one person, right? Now, if 77 people did that, then they would have been arrested and prosecuted 77,000 times. But now it's like you're having to petition the Ofcom to act. And it's almost like on the e-petitions website, if you get 10,000 signatures or if you get 100,000, they'll do something or respond. It's a little bit like that. It's like having to petition these non-departmental government agencies to show that there's public interest to take action, not that you've been offended. I've submitted complaints of me actually being injured and harmed, and I've even had my doctor write a GP, a National Health Service, doctor's note to say that I'm being harmed or injured, right? And these non-department government agencies still haven't acted. But yeah, even doctors told them to act, right? I mean, they're not going to act, but yet they're the ones who have got the powers for takedown material, to take things down from the internet and things like that. They're not using those powers, but they're meant to be acting instead of the police, right? And it's almost like they're only going to act now if they get 100,000 complaints. It's almost like we've got to petition them to act, but in numbers, not in evidence. And the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, I've put a complaint in, nothing seems to be happening. I've told my MP to authorise it and sign it off. They're quite hard to get to act because they want all the evidence up front, whereas previously, when you petition Parliament, you weren't allowed to attach any evidence to it. They called in the evidence. They used powers to get the evidence. But they're doing it the other way around now, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. Now, that ombudsman is responsible for complaints against all these departments who aren't acting, right? I don't know why Sir Ken McCallum doesn't complain to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman about the CPS, right, for his case. But Parliament itself, the MPs, are going to be directly accountable, democratically accountable to the public, right, even if they haven't broken a law. But they're trying to make out that we can't all petition to get them removed. But we can. That's being democratically accountable if they're not doing what we want. They're only now seeming to have these recall petitions and act if the police act or prosecute, right? Which means that they're legally accountable to the police, or they're only democratically accountable if they've been criminally accountable, not just purely straight off the bat democratically accountable. And they're meant to try each other in Parliament by committees, right? But they're not letting us run the petitions to they won't accept any wrongdoing or they're saying that it's all scandalous or, libelous or whatever, just the mere fact that we accuse them of something. But you can't accuse them of anything in any court or place out of Parliament. Supposedly it's only going to be in Parliament, right? Which is why the petitions go to Parliament, like the election petitions used to. So they're just blocking us and obstructing us from complaining about them and removing them, right? And sharing those petitions and getting the numbers to show that, people aren't happy rather than just purely the evidence itself. Now, don't want to lose the point from why I started recording this video, because I don't want to go over things that I've already said. Look, Led by Donkeys has just basically profiled Nigel Farage's recent financial activities and all the things that he's getting money for doing, right? So he's presenting all these shows, he's doing all these programs, like, being a news presenter in Australia, and he's doing all kinds of different speaking things and that. MPs you're meant to elect them, and they're meant to be representing you in Parliament all the time or at the constituency office, That's what the job is. But like Led by Donkeys now is saying that, Nigel Farage apparently he's not putting any time into that, right? But this is the thing. The reason I mentioned my last video is this, right? And I think that it's probably been a problem for quite a long time, but I'm gonna basically call it out and focus on since 2005. MPs in England and political parties, they're running elections in England, right? They're not getting elected in America or in Australia, right? Or any other country. So why would anyone in those countries have any interest in them, talk to them, or, well, they can't vote for them, right? Only in England. They have their own websites. they had their own websites in England, right? And they were really supposed to be on English servers and hosting, but people wouldn't have looked into that, right? And it sort of, I suppose, on the surface of it, it didn't really matter at the time, right? But they might have had a forum. They might have had a forum on their own website, and they ran adverts in the British newspapers, British magazines, and on the radio in England, because why would you advertise out of England when no one's interested in your political party? Because they can't vote for you because they're not English, right? So why would you want to run adverts in other countries, right? It would be pointless. So you are running elections in England and using British newspapers, advertising companies, radio, all under English law, and you've got the police in England, all accountable in England, right? Now, I think that a lot of these MPs probably were, some of them were breaking the law, and I think the main case is Nick Clegg, because he had a radio show in Hallam, right, or in the Sheffield area, right, and he was still running for elections. Now, that being a radio personality full-time, leading up to and potentially through your election campaigns, when you're getting paid for being on there and the whole studio set and equipment is privately funded, right? That was illegal. And anyone who would have known the election law at that time and would have had the £5,000 deposit, it might have been less than 5,000 at that time. I think it might have probably gone up to 5,000 by then, though. You could challenge Nick Clegg. And this is what Graham Moore is doing now with Sarah Poachin, right? But he's had to raise the money through donations. You could have challenged Nick Clegg, right, for that radio show, but no one did. Because I don't think that, the internet also, there wasn't as much information available, and everyone wasn't as connected as they are now to get any interesting type of things like that, unless you're on a politics course. And I've spoke to a lot of barristers, even barristers who teach barristers, and they admit it's an extremely niche area of law and they don't even know it, right? But, if you read the representation of the People Acts and you can learn it and understand it, which is what I've done, right? And there's a reason for those laws, right? There's a reason for those laws. Otherwise, you could just have absolutely anyone just come up and just pay privately, just make someone really famous and get them elected straight away. But you're not meant to be allowed to do that, right? You can't just have someone, all the TV shows just make one person famous and then get all the country to vote for them, because that's unfair. The other people in the competition haven't had a fair competition, right? Those laws exist for a reason. Now, Clegg, subsequently, he's meant to be a Lib Dem, ended up being Deputy Prime Minister of England, right? Now, also around this sort of 2005-ish onwards period, right, leading up to when Clegg got into Deputy Prime Minister, between then, you've got the BBC told everyone to go on Facebook. I was listening to the radio when I was out at work, right? I didn't know what the hell Facebook was, but the BBC soon told me about it and basically pitched that it's the latest, greatest thing and that you should do it, right? And then, create this digital profile. So the BBC were in on it as well. And, also YouTube's taking off as well. Now, the thing is, most people, right, only go on the internet to, look for knowledge, learn, education. They go on forums and groups. Some of these forums and groups are foreign, American and so forth, and have a mix of cultures, but they're nothing to do with politics, right? They're just purely social, right? Now, this is where, when at the point where suddenly you get this Facebook and they're trying to get everyone in the world to go on it, right? And also YouTube is encouraging people to go on all over the world. And this is then when you get in this mix of different nations and countries together. And that's when the alarm bells should have rang for the election law. But it didn't. And all the MPs just kind of went on there and no one called them out on it, but they should have done. But this is when they set up these non-departmental government agencies like Electoral Commission, who have got powers to take things down, but they're not taking things down, right? In fact, they're letting them do it. They're letting them do it illegally. They're not taking things down. And then, no, I mean, I didn't know anything. I was completely and totally oblivious to all this, right? But, I mean, and I hadn't quite fully clicked on it when Nigel Farage, just before he got elected, when he was doing Talking Pints. Because and to be honest, if I had not been interested in the 1688 Bill of Rights right to petition, and if I had not been using that right to do an investigation and my investigation on illegal road signs into the government, which I've got the petition, and if I hadn't have started a YouTube channel and I needed to learn the law for that, I wouldn't really have had an interest in election law or looked at it. But because you have something called an election petition, which is to challenge an election, and because if you really are interested in the 1688 Bill of Rights right to petition, and if you learn about it and research it, you end up touching on some of this election law and election petitions and the 1688 Bill of Rights, free elections and so forth. And then you end up coming across like the Representation of the People Act, right? And then you go, oh, what's this? And like the name's in the title, the Representation of the People. And you think, well, the very first main proper act of petitioning is the Observation of Due Process of Law, 1368, which is the community come together to petition the king. So the community are making a representation. And really the words of the representation of the people, that's what you're doing when you petition Parliament. It's the people making a representation, right, but not an election. But they've used that for the title of the acts that govern elections, right? So you get very interested in the act, and then you see all these provisions like, overseas broadcasting and communicating, and, surely like, Wi-Fi is a wireless communication, right? It's a communication that's transmitted without a wire, right? Now, you read the House of Lords debate on that, and it's actually very serious and important. The House of Lords debate on it, I'll put the link in this video. In fact, I'm going to put the link. I don't know if YouTube takes links because sometimes it removes them, but I'll try to put that link to Led by Donkeys and see if they will read that debate, right? And it says that they're putting out loads of, issues with foreign engagement or effects in elections, in UK elections. And they say that there are actually many, many more issues, but they're only giving you a brief general spread of the issues, and they're just briefing us on it, but they're only really scratching the surface, and there are actually even more very complex problems. But there are two main categories of problem. The first is jurisdiction, legal jurisdiction, and then the other is effects, other people affecting it by, either their opinion or speaking or saying and things like that, right? Now, in the Act, the popularity itself, so popularity is a thing, right? You can measure it, how popular someone is, right? That element of popularity, okay, has a value, right? And because the more popular you are, then the more electable you are, right? And they say that popularity has to be clean. It has to be lawful popularity. And if you obtain an amount of popularity which is obtained illegally, right, unlawfully, then that's illegal popularity. That is the basis in it. Now, when Nigel Farage was doing Talking Pints, he was getting very popular and very famous from it, and then he stood for election and won, right? Now, some of that popularity came from Talking Pints, and he was having loads of guests on and getting the public to make him into a household name, right? And the Tories were all going on there as well. It definitely, that election should have been challenged by Talking Pints. That Talking Pints, it was privately funded, and it wasn't paid for. Notional spending, implied spending, all these ridiculous, stupid terms, right? There is no way that Reform UK paid for the set and setting and backdrop and studio lighting and, like the chairs and the cabinet and the tables and the staff, the lighting staff for those Talking Pint shows, yet they increased Nigel Farage's popularity leading up to his election. Farage was not lawfully elected, but he was never challenged on it. And even when I was watching those Talking Pints programmes, I'd just started to read the representation of the People Act, and it needed to become more clear, and I needed to understand it more thoroughly, right? But but once you understand that principle and basis, you can question programmes like Spitting Image. Thatcher, after Spitting Image was released, the next election after, she actually did get a few thousand more signatures. Now, that might not seem a lot to you, but if some of those people, those extra signatures came from in her area, had seen Spitting Image and made her more likable from it, or even warm their affection towards her from it, those 1,000, 1,000, 2,000 signatures make a difference, right? And look at Sarah Pochin's. She only won by 6 votes. So if you get an extra 3,000 votes, it's significant. So but I think it is the news programmes and newspapers. Like Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was providing entertainment, right, in the newspaper. He was also getting paid for it. Now people were buying that newspaper and paying for the newspaper, right? But Johnson was still providing entertainment. It's meant to be gifted when it's illegal, but this is a thing, right? He's not meant to be shown or presented to the public in any way which he can entertain by private means while the election is actually going on. And I know that Johnson was doing that newspaper column while the election was on. Now, the thing with Johnson's newspaper column is that people were paying for the newspaper. They were buying it. It wasn't a gift. Now, the reason why Farage and Talking Pints is that you're getting it for free on YouTube, okay? You don't have to pay for YouTube. And that's the difference with YouTube, because you can go on YouTube in a library, or you don't have to actually pay. You don't have to have an account on YouTube. You can just be an internet browser and browse it and go on there without an account. You don't have to join it. You can just watch. It's just public access, and that's what made Talking Pints into a gift of entertainment. But this is the thing: when someone stands as a candidate in an election, you are only really supposed to see or hear about them through adverts that they've paid for, right? Through leaflets, adverts, and pamphlets that they've paid for themselves, right? And all these television appearances, they aren't really supposed to have them. MPs can appear on TV because they're privileged to, and supposedly we want to hear what they're doing in government. But as soon as someone's standing in an election and you can prove that they're going to get popularity in their election votes from it, it's not meant to be shown, other than the licensed television operators are allowed to cover the processes of the election. Like, they're allowed to let you know there's an election on, and they're allowed to let you know, who's, they cover, they're allowed to cover the processes and procedures of the election, but they're not meant to allow to be able to really promote the candidates or make any candidate more or less popular than another candidate. But I think they have been doing. And this is when you get these MPs taking all these jobs on, and it's actually making them more popular for the next election, right? And the closer it is to an election, the easier it is to prove that something contributed towards their popularity or made them popular, right? But if they take on these jobs 24/7, 12 months all the way around the year, they're making themselves permanently popular. Now, if they're an MP, right, they're asked on the news. But when they're being put on the news in Australia, then people in England are watching it, through social media. It's still getting back to the people in, Clacton-on-Sea that are voting for Farage, right? So this is where we've got, there are lots of issues with the election. The devices and equipment are meant to be foreign, and I'm not supposed to make use out of foreign devices and equipment. And it's not just that. So while all this was going on with, Farage and Reform, but also the other parties have been doing it as well, because they've all gone onto social media, right? If you go onto David Davis's YouTube channel, Facebook page, right? David Davis MP has got a Facebook page. I'll put this in my YouTube channel in my normal post section, where you can, it's like a little kind of like forum stream. You can put posts and images, right? Because this is what I want to try to explain to Led by Donkeys, right? David Davis MP, right? David Davis MP, he has got election material on his Facebook page, right? I mean, I can show you the pictures of it. He's got election material on his Facebook page, right? And when he was running for election, he's not an MP, right? He's just David Davis. When he's running for that election, he's just David Davis. He's not David Davis MP, because he hasn't become an MP. He hasn't won the election, right? And he's got all this advert and promotional material on there. Now, once he gets elected, he becomes David Davis MP, and then he is the MP, right? And his election campaign is over. Now, if you read the Representation of the People Acts and the Control of Advertisements 2007 in Class E, right? The election material is going to be taken down after the election, right? That's different law to the right to petition government, where we can petition government about our own individual cases, because we're not getting elected to Parliament. There's a different law for the right to petition and a different law for elections, right? Now, this is what happened to George Galloway. I mean, when George Galloway did that Batley and Spend by-election, the council were taking some of his material down, and he was kicking off, and then he didn't win, right? And they were saying that, he was taking all his material down and so forth, right? Now, not every MP, but most of the MPs now have got a Facebook page with all the election material on, but they're not taking it down. So it's having continuous effect on people, continuous advertising effect on people, right? And some of those MPs, once they become an MP, they're actually using that Facebook page as an MP, not just as a candidate in election. It's actually, they changed their name to MP, and they actually, on the MP's contact page on Parliament website, UK Parliament website, where the MPs have got their contact information, and traditionally it's meant to be phone number, address in Parliament, address at their constituency office, right? And an email. And the email usually is parliament.gov.uk, right? That doesn't advertise anything. It doesn't advertise a commercial company. It doesn't advertise Yahoo, Hotmail, BT, Internet, EE, whatever. When it says at parliament.uk, it's not advertising a commercial enterprise or business, right? And neither is a phone number. Phone numbers are also transferable. If you've got a phone number, you can transfer it to a different phone company when you get a new mobile phone. It's just a number, right? But now they've started to put they're advertising Blue Sky on there. They're advertising X. They advertise Twitter. They're advertising Facebook. I haven't seen one of them advertise YouTube yet, but, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. I've seen them put Blue Sky on there. Facebook, Instagram, right? Now, David Davis MP does not have on his Parliament contact page the link to his Facebook, but he has declared his Facebook as David Davis MP, and he's updating it with the things that he's doing as an elected MP, right? But yeah, he's still got election material on there, right? Which is still voting to vote for him. And also, it's also saying to vote for Conservative generally, right? So if you visit that page, it's saying vote Conservatives, but yet he's now an elected MP. Now, many of the MPs, particularly Labour ones, including Rachel Reeves, right? Rachel Reeves has got a YouTube channel, which has also got things when she was running for her election, which haven't been taken down so many days after the election, and also Parliament stuff now for Parliament, right? Many of the MPs have put their social media links on there, and their social media pages have got election material and photos, which haven't been removed. So the social media is completely and totally breaking the election law, and the Electoral Commission bloody won't do anything. But it's almost like that Ofcom have had 77,000 complaints about, GB News, but they didn't. It's taken them that much to act. It's almost like even though someone's breaking the law, they won't act until so many people complain about it, right? Which is ridiculous. It's almost like you've got to, it's like fundraising. You got to raise so many complaints in order to get action, which is ridiculous. If someone's done something illegal or wrong, you should act straight away. The Electoral Commission have got takedown powers. Why? Because the only thing that really matters with this is social media videos and images. They're not using that power. They're not. And I don't want to be, condescending or, but I've seen one of the guys at the Electoral Commission, and he's in the shorts videos, right? He's like one of these university graduate boffins. Hey, I've got a job at the Electoral Commission. He's not fit to be in that position, and he must be totally brainwashed and sold out to the government and the whole mission that the government's trying to do. The Electoral Commission didn't exist for that much earlier than YouTube and Facebook, right? And judging by the policies, it's all this think tank administrative law policy, which tells the staff, oh, you cannot do this, or you've got to do this or do that. So they're all being put under these regime behaviour policies, right? And what I find is that it tends to be the same type of thing with the e-petitions team. Now, the e-petitions team are just blocking and rejecting every single petition, nearly. Literally, less than a quarter of them are getting published, right? And their policy, they're not even interpreting and applying the policy properly. The policy goes against standing orders. It even says don't use standing orders. It's completely corrupt. They're totally blocking us. I know that's for sure. And I think this is what Ofcom, the Electoral Commission, the Advertising Standards are sort of doing now. They're not actually acting on complaints, and we're funding all these departments, which cost an absolutely bomb, when you used to just, when you could just when there was civil arrests, right, in the 1800s, you just went down to the cop shop, to the police station and said, oh yeah, I want to bring civil action against this guy, I want a warrant. And you had to have a bit of evidence, but you paid for it, right? And then you paid them to try and prosecute them, right? And they would do it. And then that's it, one person, right? Now, they're getting all these complaints and they're just not acting on them. I think if the public actually went into those departments and looked through what's going on, I think they'd actually have a heart attack and think, bloody yeah, look, all these complaints of corruption and wrongdoing and what's been done about it. They've just been bottling them up in sort of dream bottles and putting them in the cupboards, hiding them away. I mean, surely, the Advertising Standards Authority, their full body of complaints surely could shut down YouTube that, oh yeah, people don't like the adverts, they find them annoying, the adverts generally, right? Not just oh, this advert or that advert, it'll just prosecute, YouTube for running adverts, the adverts are causing harassment, it's the fact that they're running ads, it's harassing people, right? You could prove that, with the full complaints. So that's the election law anyway, right? And so all of the MPs and the political parties are actually, YouTube and Facebook are letting them break the law, right? They're allowing them to break the law on their platforms, and these non-departmental government agencies are not using the powers to take those things down. In fact, the Advertising Standards Authority won't act against political adverts, right? And Ofcom hasn't been doing, right? So, and Parliament aren't doing anything when you complain. And then you've got, like, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who's meant to be the Speaker. He's got the Speaker's Conference, which is meant to run for fair elections. You got to be kidding me. All of Parliament are corrupt, completely corrupt. None of these elections, it's got to be widespread election corruption, right? It's not just election propaganda now, it's widespread election corruption. None of these elections can be valid, and nothing that Labour have done since they've been voted can be valid. I would actually probably call, I would push in the Supreme Court for them to say that, you know, none of the parliaments have been valid since around the time YouTube and Facebook, you know, started off and the BBC said to go on there, right? I don't think any of the elections have been valid since then. I think they've all broken extremely widespread election law, and all of the laws enacted should be deemed void since at least, you know, 2005-7-ish onwards. Now, while that election flaunting has been going on, at the same time, YouTube and Facebook have not been upholding our constitutional law and rights for political causes and campaigns. Like, I've had my channel suspended. I know that Big Brother Watch have had at least one video taken down, right? I don't know if Led by Donkeys have, but if they did, we'd hear about it, right? Led by Donkeys are doing political campaigns. Big Brother Watch are. Many channels and people are, right? And you're meant to have parliamentary privilege for that. Now, Facebook and YouTube are meant to apply English law in England, but they've got this policy they're always getting us to agree to, which they're basing their policy around their Section 230 rights in America. But it's not English law. It's not the law in England, and it doesn't apply in England. And even the new Online Safety Act 2023, which now, miraculously, all these American porn adult sites are all obeying this English law, which doesn't apply in America. And when I checked and researched how Ofcom enforces it, actually they can't actually prosecute people in America. All they can do is sort of try and get these intermediaries and things like that. So none of these websites actually have to do anything really, but they've all just bended to it. Yet Rand Paul was saying, you know, we'd have to bend the knee, yet, and he's meant to be going against the online digital identity thing, but all these sites are you know, complying with this English law when they're not in England, right? Now, this is the thing. Yet, all of these political channels, and there's a lot of people now going to protests and canvassing protests and so forth, all of those causes are meant to be protected. And if you take it down or seize it illegally, it's contempt, right? But we're not getting any enforcement. Parliament themselves won't act. I've tried to get them to act, but they won't. Now, they've got this clause in the Online Safety Act saying legal privilege, but, you know, that's what parliamentary privilege is one of the legal privileges besides legal professional privilege in the courts, right? Because Parliament's a court. We're not getting anything, right? We aren't getting anything restored or put back up. Now, their Section 230 does not extend to England, and they can't include it in their policy, which means that they can't get you to agree, consent, or accept to a policy because you can't voluntarily give up your political rights or privileges in England, right? So we're being totally scammed and gypped. And then the last video that I did with the big map on it, that's mainly to do with the EU rights, European Convention on Human Rights. Now, Led by Donkeys might not agree with me on that because, you know, I think maybe Led by Donkeys have different opinions about, you know, the right to life and abortion and so forth. But surely if all life has a right to live, and, mainly human life, right, then surely those abortion laws and the assisted suicide ones are questionable under the European law. But Parliament have just been, putting them through, right? So Parliament have been completely and totally breaking these European Convention of Human Rights. And I think you're meant to call it out in the courts if you get a court case, right? If you end up in a court case, you can get the judge to say there's an incompatibility. But what I've noticed is that a lot of these social media platforms, unless you've particularly harassed someone or committed a criminal offence, then they phone the police. But then it's just like the defendant against the victim, right, through the police. And it's not actually the platform. When it's the political stuff, it's actually the platform who are breaking the law. It's not, some other third party usually, unless you're in a Facebook group and the admin takes it down, right? But the police won't act in that. So how can you call out, these contempts and some of the human rights violations through the courts? Well, you can't, because what Facebook and YouTube are doing in all these big platforms, TikTok, we don't go to court with them. They're just self-enforcing, right, from America or from China. They're self-enforcing just by strongman power, muscle power, which does not actually follow through to a court. So if they do anything which is against the Human Rights Convention or our parliamentary constitutional rights, you don't end up in a court, because what they're just doing is it is like a war, because they're forcing it down from overseas by force, right? A force. They're using a force, not actual. They're claiming it's legal process, but they're not going to court. But not legal process of our country, right? Illegal legal process. Now, that's almost like a fighter plane shooting you down, or, firing a missile from overseas, right? Surely, just taking your stuff down, taking it down, right? It's not lawful. And, that's where MI5, Sir Ken McCallum is going to protect us from foreign threats that are against the legislature of this country, threats which break our democratic processes, invade on the democratic processes, right? And illegal acts from overseas, particularly when they're widespread against a large number of people. That's a threat. It's an illegal threat, because it's a widespread multiple action threat against many citizens, which is against the law and legislature of England from a foreign country, and many which are engaged in privileged democratic process actions, and also a foreign country using its law when that's not the law of this country, right? And also, the policies are legal. So I think it is a media war. It's a media war. It's actually a war. And what's happening? What are the effects of this? Well, the effects are this. Firstly, none of these main parties should have been able to be using social media, but they are. So, Lib Dems, Labour Party, the Conservatives, Green and Reform, mainly, and negligibly the independent people, they're using social media illegally when it should not be used at all. So they're managing to use it to continue to fight for their election and their electability in face of this massive social media revolution. Meanwhile, many of the legitimate independent causes which aren't electoral but they're petitioning Parliament, which are challenging the government on things that they're doing illegally, which are just wanting to get the laws made or changed in this or that, which could be potentially a lot more successful, those endeavours are getting taken down, or many of them are getting taken down, and pages are getting taken down. People going to protests and canvassing the protests, sharing the cause are getting taken down. So we're having a tempering and bolstering of the main political parties, which is completely illegal, at the same time as they've been attacking and taking down independent political causes and material which have the legal right and protection but aren't getting it. So that means that they're disadvantaging independent people and causes by petition and protest, while at the same time illegally advantaging all of the main political parties. And that is where we come into this video with Led by Donkeys, who is doing this thing on Farage. Because Farage is probably the worst and the most severe offender of this, right? And he's making a profit out of it, a personal profit and money, which he very well might. That some of that money might be going. He might be putting into reform and his election campaign. Yeah, he got paid for private funding and popularity, where all these fantasy sets and setting and backdrop, staff, camera crew, makeup artists, all this stuff is paid for privately, helping make his global profile and popularity, which does affect his Clacton campaign, by the way, right? And reform, rubs off on reform, right? That is completely and totally privately funded. He gets money in his own pocket for that. When private people make him famous and pay him, then if he uses any of that money, declares the profits from that into his campaign, then he's also helping fund reform out of it. And then just declaring the little odds and tods and bits and bats that he's doing for reform. Like, his leaflets and official newspaper adverts or official radio adverts, paid for by Reform UK, or using Google ads or YouTube ads paid for Reform UK, even though these platforms actually use foreign servers, equipment, and stuff like that. And a lot of these pages are getting comments from foreign people. They're getting comments from... I actually got a girl in Australia, and she happens to be actually a Russian girl, right? But she's in Australia, to go on Facebook for me and YouTube to show that, she can comment on... actually put comments to British voters, right, in Clacton. Australian people, can tell people in Clacton how much of an idiot Farage might be. That is affecting the election in Clacton from Australia, right? And they can also use report tools and have potentially get reform videos taken down if it breaks a policy. And that policy is not even UK election law, just policy, global policy. So that, like the Obscene Publications Act, I use that example because it's an act that you're meant to be allowed to use in elections to have a full and free, fair election. If Obscene Publications goes against Facebook policy, they'll take it down. Yet, for an election, you have to be able to use a full election law. So that's just the Obscene Publications Act, just an example of a British law that you have to be allowed to use to its full extent to have a free and fair election, because in an election advert and promotion, you've got to be able to use the full extent of English law. Yeah, it's an example where Facebook policy potentially would take it down, take the campaign down, right? Like, the Ed Miliband, little Ed Miliband Conservative advert, the S&M Thatcher one, right? They're mocking Ed Miliband, ridiculing Ed Miliband. Someone could say, flag that on harassment, and YouTube or Facebook could take that advert down, but yeah, it's allowed in a UK election because that's why the Tories ran it. So that's just to show and prove that it's contravening the election law and rules. It's just an example of how this foreign social media revolution is playing out. And I think Farage, the point that Led by Donkeys are making in their video here is that the time that he's available in Clacton for his voters and in Parliament voting is being reduced. Now, I would say to Led by Donkeys There's a book, I actually want to buy it, but it's quite expensive. There are 4 volumes. One of the volumes, I haven't found it yet, but there are 3 volumes. Most of them are available online. You can get them on Google Books or the Internet Archive. I have to say that the Internet Archive has been invaluable in getting hold of rare books and legal research. They've had a lot of legal issues with the Internet Archive. I just tried to go on it today now, and I couldn't get on there from Google. It won't open. I had to use Proxy to get on it, but you can go on it from America. That I would suggest that for some strange reason, although there's no adult content, seems like this Online Safety Act has had some sort of effect on that Internet Archive. I don't know why, though, because if you're using it for research for a Parliament case or a legal case, legal professional privilege, you should actually be exempt from the Online Safety Act. Internet Archive can claim complete exemption from the Online Safety Act through legal professional privilege if they say, look, we've got all these legal books and documents on this website, which people can, I've been researching them for parliamentary cases, right? But you can still get on there at the moment through Proxy. But what I'm saying is, why did I mention the Internet Archive? So you can get those William Prynn books on there. The William Prynn books, I don't know if I said the wrong name before, William Prynn books, right? It's called A Brief Calendar of Parliamentary Writs, okay? The William Prynn, he did two 4-volume collections. One of them I think it's called A Brief Calendar on Parliamentary Writs, but it's a longer title than that. But and I think it's the volume. Well, I've got these in PDF right on my phone anyway. I've got them, 3 of them. I don't have the one that's missing. I'd like to find that one, but there's a volume for sale, but it's like going for a ridiculous price, like about over $1,000 they want for this book, right? But in that book, William Prynn goes through all of the parliamentary rules, right? All of the rules in Parliament. He goes through all of the writs and the old summons and all of the old documents. He's very interested in how Parliament came to be, how it was formed, what is it, origins, what are the origins of Parliament, who used to be called to Parliament. It was mainly the religious people it started off as, and then it grew to have more people in it, and then they had these other great councils, but they weren't Parliament. They didn't call them parliaments. They were like mainly the what we call the land, the knights who had lands, which is equivalent to the barons, and it was more of a military style thing, and then the actual parliaments were more of the religious leaders, right? The bishops and the abbots and so forth, right? But in these books, I don't really want to bore you to death at the moment because this video is already now getting towards an hour long, and I was I'll make a little 20-minute video to Led by Donkeys, right? But it ended up being an hour. In that book, William Prynn goes through all of the duties of the MPs. What are the actual true duties of the MPs? And when are they entitled to parliamentary privilege and when aren't they entitled to parliamentary privilege? But also you've got to take into account they've got acts now. They've got the actual Strode's Act, and it's been legislated since. But Prynn actually goes into detail of things like the MPs have got to actually turn up into Parliament and go there, and they've got to be available for their constituents. Now, there used to be like 2 knights of every shire. There used to be two MPs in each area. Now, they said that if the MPs were gallivanting off and going on holidays places or not there when they're meant to be there, that was actually a breach of privilege, right? And my main example of that in more recent times, since I read that, in fact, the first person that popped into my head when I read that was Matt Hancock, because Matt Hancock went off and did that, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here in the jungle thing, right? And I know that at the time he was doing that show, they had someone walking round his constituency area saying to the voters in the area, what do you think to Matt Hancock being off, gallivanting off, to do this programme? And they said, it's disgusting, he shouldn't actually be allowed to do it. He should be here for us, right? Well, that actually is the case. This is why those books are very important, like the William Prynn books, because the William Prynn books go into those type of issues, details on those type of matters. And this is why people like Sola Braverman aren't keen on books like that. None of the MPs are, because none of the MPs, they don't turn up a lot of the time. They're not there, yet they're building all these Seneds and they're building all these things like the Senedd and the Scottish Parliament, and they're wanting to have more Senedd members, right? Yet some of these Senedd members aren't even going in. They're voting from home while they're doing childcare, and they're not. What they're actually wanting is to get people elected so they can swan around and be important and say, I'm the decision maker on behalf of these big parties, and we're not. Yet they're not even turning up there to debate, to vote, to be there, to even have surgery. They're actually more like just, I've got the title, I get to make the decision on behalf of all the people, but, I'm going to bother turning up to see the people, right? And this is the thing now, really, that I think that Led by Donkeys is highlighting in this particular little video short they've done now. They're highlighting that, Nigel Farage is doing all these things and getting all this money, but why did he want to be an MP? Why did he want to get elected into Parliament if he's more interested in being a celebrity and popular on the back of private funding and money? He seems like he just wants to be a celebrity and wants to tell the world what he should be doing in politics and what we should and shouldn't be doing, rather than us making our own decisions for ourselves, right? Yeah, he's got the voting power in Parliament. So, if you're interested in books like William Prynn, like The Brief Calendar of Parliamentary Writs, they're quite long books, but they've got things like that in them about, MPs should, that if they're not there for their voters and electors, then that's a breach of privilege, right? So, that should be something of interest. Matt Hancock was one of the violators of that. I've seen some... They do a lot of promo now, but it seems to make themselves more famous. I mean, even Jamie Stone, I know that the north of Scotland, right, is quite sparse, right? They're very lucky they haven't had loads of over-construction or over-development, right? It's quite a low population for a large area, right? But Jamie Stone, he's having all these, friendly telephone calls with all these local radio stations and loads of local companies, and he's turning up and doing photo shoots and promo, like, oh, here I am, Jamie Stone on the coast of Scotland, here behind me. Look, I'm in this beautiful new radio station studio. They provide radio services to all of, this Scotland area, and here's a beautiful, ocean behind me or whatever, there's the Orkney Islands in the distance or whatever it is, right? Here I am. Look, I'm doing work. I'm here to see my constituents, but it's more like a promo shot, and an advert for that radio show, right? And that's the type of thing that the MPs seem to be doing now. I've seen one of the MPs for not Monmouthshire. What's the name of it? Montgomeryshire, right? Montgomeryshire, right? The MP for Montgomeryshire, if you go on his Facebook page, he's doing all this, like, this baton thing. Like the Olympics, when you have a golden flame torch thing and you carry it and you run around. He's got this, like, prop, this pretend, or I don't know if it's made out of cardboard or plastic or prop, right? He's got this, like, golden torch, like, oversized one, and he's kind of, like, dressed up in sort of, like a marathon clothes or something, like, doing a charity marathon or something, or whatever, something like that. And he's got this torch, and he's just, like, got all these local Labour fans and ladies there, and they're all doing this, like, it's a charity event, but it's like, hey, look, I'm the local MP, aren't I a good boy? I'm raising money for charity in this, and he's on my, the local hardcore Labour group and all these, local women or whatever, but it seems to be just, advertising the Labour Party or raising his own profile, making him look like he's doing something for good or charity. But is he seeing any new people there? How much time does he spend doing that charity event? Is it a whole day or whatever, right? And who attend it are all the people probably who voted him in, right? And why would he need surgery with them when he's already, fully, they're very happy with what he's been doing in Parliament, right? Because he's just voting for everything that hardcore local Montgomery Labour should want. But that's not seeing constituents in general who have got general, problems and issues or grievances or whatever, is it? It's just like basically putting himself up for people who voted him in, right? When I'm more self promo, adding to all these photos which they've still got up there, which they never bothered taking down from when they got elected, saying vote for me. And then the next election comes round, and look, they're still up there now, and they're still having the continued effect which they've been having, all year, the whole year, all the way around through, right? So why aren't the Electoral Commission, why aren't they using those powers? I'd like to see how many times the Electoral Commission abuse those takedown powers. I don't even think they're using them. This Electoral Commission are utterly useless. What we should be doing, all these new non-departmental government agencies, I think are a utter scam. They've been instituted and put together and put under corporate administrative policy, and they're just actually there to absorb complaints, and so they're not acting on them. They're just doing all these weird assessments and testing and statistics and all this stuff on them, but actually people's grievances aren't getting done. They're almost like these absorption shields to stop things getting done. Yet the selling point is that, now it's going to be regulated by Ofcom. Well, Ofcom are regulating things that aren't even in England now, not under English law, like all these adult sites, right? Yeah, they still don't even give licenses to online platforms. Why haven't they been telling them to take down all this election material, right? The advertising standards aren't doing, right? So who is? Oh no, the Electoral Commission do that. We're not going to do that. But there's a bit of crossover. Both of them are supposed to have a bit of responsibility. Who's in charge of it? Oh, Lord Hallam of Hallam, who was in charge of Facebook, right? Before Nick Clegg became global president. And Baron Grades, who was in charge of ITV when Spitting Image was on and so forth. This is the thing. Can we trust David Davis when he's going to be in charge of Big Brother Watch with Silky Carlo, right? David Davis says that he's, against digital ID and all this facial recognition, but has he been engaged in some of the social media revolution himself as a Conservative member, right? I know that Sir Peter Bottomley stood down 2004, at the end of 2004. He didn't stand again. He was one of the most longest serving, but if you go on his website, he's got all these pictures which say our plan. Who's our? Is he electors, does he mean? Or does he mean the Conservative Party, our plan? Or does he mean the global agenda, our plan? Now, Peter Bottomley's been an MP for longer than I've been alive, but really all this new stuff which I'm talking about now is mainly since 2005, 6, 7, when YouTube and Facebook came into the picture, right? That's when I'm complaining about this really severe election stuff. I'm not saying that there haven't been violations in the past, but I think the TV have really been flaunting the rules, particularly with, we shouldn't really hear about these people, really, unless they've paid for flyers or radio adverts. We shouldn't really be hearing about candidates. But the TV, you get these TV reporters, these women, and they really want to get into it. They want to, they want to get into it all. And this is the problem with some of these women. They don't fully understand and comprehend the law properly, and their lawyers aren't advising them properly, right? The spitting image lawyers didn't properly, truly advise them properly, right? Because it was actually presenting the candidate or like a caricature of the candidate is still a representation of the candidate, right? Still a representation of Margaret Thatcher, and then they've even got rosettes, voting rosettes on some of them, right, for the parties, right? So, you know, the problem is that you get these women, these reporters who they just want to be popular, and they just want to be relevant, and they want to be with it, and they know there's an election on, and they just want to get involved. Right? They want to be in front of the TV holding a microphone, being extremely famous and popular and talking to Nigel Farage. But I'm like, you can't fucking do that. It's illegal. Right? You're affecting the popularity of certain people and candidates. Right? And this is why I do not like mainstream TV, you know, Strictly Come Dancing and all these game shows and so forth, because it's the same type of intelligence that is spreading greed and corruption and causing the, you know, a lot of the social divide. These people think that they're helping. Oh, no, like, you know, we'll be good and we'll teach people how to be good, or we'll do this or that, and we'll have Alan Titchmarsh on in front of a Christmas fire with loads of, you know, presents and a woolly sweater to everyone. Yeah, this is what's causing, you know, the poor people, lower classes and working classes, you know, you know, when you're flaunting all these highly successful people who are showing off about everything, you know, what happens is that they're trying to make out that this is how you ought to behave, and anyone who doesn't, they're in the wrong. But that isn't actually how it works, and that isn't actually what's going on. And I do not think that it's a good thing, really, because these TV shows have just been ignoring the negative effects of what they've been doing on the country, and they've only been focusing on the spotlight of like the studio audience clapping and liking it, or certain circles liking it and clapping. And I think now what you've got at the least is on YouTube, you've got all these other alternative views which never used to be shown through the TV, in the type of views that you might have down the pub or whatever, and you've got you end up with channels a little bit like Jimmy Dore, right, who is actually criticising a lot of the thing. But in order for even those channels who are criticising the mainstream narrative, they themselves are actually becoming celebrities and famous and socially successful as well. So in a way, like Russell Brand, they actually themselves partially adopt and become somewhat like the people that they're opposing, which is what you end up when you've got Russell Brand, who is completely and totally challenging the main narrative of the main government and system, but yet he himself is the ultimate pinnacle and fruit embodiment of what you get when you become a successful celebrity. It's just that he's a successful celebrity who agrees with the other successful celebrities, and then you've got everyone in life who isn't, and then you get people, you know, who, you know, this is what causes, you know, a lot of the crime and stuff like that. But, you know, like they're the happy people with the happy world, right? You know, and everyone isn't in the happy people with the happy world. In fact, they might be making it less happy by, they don't want to accept that their behaviour is got negative impact and influence, right? And yet, since YouTube started and took off, everyone seems to be having to go in that direction to fight this, right? Everyone is sort of subscribing and signing up to becoming somewhat, you know, relevant or popular, or having to get themselves out there in order to oppose or combat their opponents, which is sort of the position that Russell Brand's right at the top of that sort of position, right? But this is the thing, you know, I was wanting to focus on what was lawful or not, but, you know, end up going off topic a bit. So, you know, the elections, a lot of the election activity, I think it's illegal, and I don't really know what's going to happen, because all of the main news programs are full on in on it. I think the BBC and ITV, Sky, all these Australian channels, they're in on it. They're like they're fully on in on it. They got Farage on there. So they're not gonna put their hands up and admit that, you know, it's illegal if hell freezes over, right? And I don't think Lindsay Hoyle is in Parliament. And remember that Keir Starmer has been prosecuting people in the CPS illegally against their constitutional rights, which is one of the main problems, the privileges. So, you know, this is the thing with Led by Donkeys. What Led by Donkeys is trying to raise awareness of Farage and all his activities. But one thing that, you know, I would kind of like, you know, to see from Led by Donkeys is them actually focusing on the legislation itself, you know, the legislation part of it, you know, like the part of William Prynn where it says that, you know, MPs should be available for their constituents and just gallivant off everywhere, because they're making that point in their video, right? They're making that point in their video, you know, that Farage is off gallivanting around, but if they could actually also include, like, some of the quotes from William Prynn in the books, which, like, actually backs that up legally, then I think that Led by Donkeys would have a stronger video and a more important video than just, you know, going out and, you know, getting the evidence and material on Farage to back it up with supportive law behind it as well, which is kind of like why I was trying to raise awareness of the law side of it to these channels, okay? And like the Representation of the People Act, which says that, you know, the candidate is not supposed to be shown to people by means which, you know, is privately funded, right? Which was going on before he got elected, leading into his election from Talking Pints, right? So, you know, I'm just a bit disappointed when channels like Led by Donkeys, who have got a massive audience, or a lot more bigger audience than what I've got, the reason that I research these things and read about them is to try to inform channels like Led by Donkeys about it, basically, you know, hoping that they will, you know, mention some of these laws to people